starting soon.
And we started. Hey, everyone. We're glad you can join us today. We're doing our Let's Talk, where we talk about the sermon, and we may talk about any other things you guys have comments on. So Jeff and I are going to carry a conversation. If you're watching, let us know if you're watching. If you have any questions at all, let us know. We just want this to be a conversation about the things we've talked about on sermons or just anything going on. So what are we talking about today?
Well, series, it's just been different things I wanted to talk about or things I thought needed to be addressed. And this week was talk about how sometimes the church and the world can disagree pretty powerfully on areas of sex or sexuality. One man, one woman for life. That's the avenue, and that's where sex is supposed to be expressed. It's a gift, but I wanted to talk about a couple things from the sermon that I really didn't have enough time to dig into as much as I probably would have liked. The first, just to kind of get back in our head, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, Paul says, "Flee from sexual immorality, because all other sins a person commits are outside their body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." And so Paul says you need to flee from it, run from it as hard as you can. Immorality, again, anything other than that, one man, one woman for life, 100% intimacy tied to 100% commitment. Anything other than that, you run away from it as hard as you can. And in Paul's day, that was super hard to do because it was a very sexual culture. But America is a very sexual culture. We use women in bikinis to sell lawnmowers, for crying out loud. So this notion that running away from it may be kind of hard to do. And Paul gives a motive for it. He says all other sins that a person commits are different than this one. That this particular thing has a way of getting its hooks into you deeper than really anything else. And we talked about that at some length on Sunday, and I don't necessarily want to revisit all that. But I do want to talk about this notion of trusting yourself and how much can you trust yourself, and how much can you rely on your own gut instinct to keep you straight. On a lot of things, actually, I think sometimes that's healthy to trust yourself and to trust your own gut. I think if the Holy Spirit is speaking to you at all, if you've got any sort of a conscience, you normally know what's up and down, and relying on that voice in the back of your head that God's whispering, can I trust that I'm hearing that right? I think usually you can. On this particular issue, though, it seems like it's kind of hard to trust that. And I don't, again, it's partly because of what Paul said there in verse 18. All other sins are different than this one. And there's something about this particular thing that can make it kind of hard to really trust our gut and trust our instinct. And I wanted to talk about that if we could just a little.
On the question that we can ask ourselves, like, can I trust myself? That's what I didn't teach on that a few weeks ago or a month ago or something, but it was similar. It's when we're walking with God, that's when we have His wisdom, His Spirit. That is the time you will be probably encouraged to trust your decisions when you are walking with God, because in your decisions are God's decisions. He's given you those ideas, the wisdom to make decisions. There's a misconception that when we are walking with God, that everything that happens we're just supposed to wait and God, are you going to answer this? Are you going to let it happen? When we talk about prayer, it's like people think we're saying, don't make any decisions at all. Always stop and pray, God, can I eat the sandwich for lunch, or should I have the salad? And it's not really that. I mean, the reason the Bible says that we get God's wisdom, the reason we seek it out is to live that life with God's wisdom in us. So in Galatians chapter 5, it talks about how we have the freedom to make decisions. We can choose. We can, for example, be in an adulterous relationship, but should we? Is it good? Like, we have the freedom. We physically can do that, but it doesn't mean it's good for you or that it isn't sinful. So Paul starts with saying you have the freedom to do whatever you want, right? God's not going to freeze you up before you're going to do something. But are you in the right state of mind? Or you're walking in the flesh, Paul says it's evident when you're walking in the flesh, you are going to have idolatry, sexual immorality, hatred, jealousy, all those things. And we talked about that a few weeks ago. In the flesh, we don't make good decisions. When we walk with the Spirit of God is when we can, quote unquote, trust ourselves. But even there, that's a tricky thing
And it's a tough
do.
one. This one again, because it's not like any other sin. Your heart gets connected in here a lot deeper. Your emotions get involved a lot quicker than they do on other types of things. And when your heart and your emotions are all tied up in whatever it is, sometimes you're not as clear thinking as you'd like to be. In the Old Testament, there was a king named Solomon who, as far as the Old Testament perspective, was the wisest man who ever lived. Some guys think he's the wisest man who will ever live. That he was just given such a unique gift from God to understand things that it'll never be replicated. And yet, in 1 Kings, I looked it up here, chapter 11, it mentions that Solomon, even though he was told by God, don't intermarry with those people who aren't of the same idea, same faith, going the same direction you're going, don't intermarry with them. Solomon did. And it says he held fast to him in love. And Solomon had some issues with sex and sexuality. It said he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, which are just slaves, really a harem for that sort of thing. And his wives led him astray. As he grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart wasn't fully devoted to the Lord God like his father David's had been. This notion that his heart got so tied up in sex and sexuality that he wasn't able to think clearly, even though by grace he had been given more wisdom, more intellect than almost anybody who's ever lived. There's just something about this temptation, unlike any other, that can turn you around. And certainly the world, when we talk about the disagreements that people inside the church and people outside the church have with one another, this is one of those very pronounced disagreements. I think a lot of people outside the church would say, hey, if you feel it in this issue, it has to be right. Whatever you're getting pushed towards, well, that has to be the right. As long as it's not hurting anybody else, as long as it's not illegal, hey, man, if you're feeling it, it's up to you. And again, not really arguing about what you have the freedom to do. Just, is this going to take you where you want to go? Is this going to take you to again, full devotion to God, or is it going to take you someplace else? And I think on this issue, what I could have said a little more is I think you ought to be careful not to trust yourself too much here. And just a couple of tips, and I hit on some of this on Sunday. Get other people involved. I mean, if you're into kind of a suspicious deal, and especially if you're into a relationship or a set of behavior that even some of your Christian friends are starting to say, hey, I don't know, man, this seems a little wrong. Talk to a trusted Christian friend. Talk to somebody who you know is solid with the Lord. Ask them what they think. Be real direct about it. Share your heart. There's something about putting light on this particular thing that really can save a lot of us from trouble. And again, it wars against our instinct, because most of the time I can trust myself. I don't even involve anybody. It's my private thing. But I don't think we're as smart on this as we'd like to pretend. So
some of the things that we have talked about here is to help you. It's not even to help you not trust yourself, just to give you room to have other people speak into your life. I meet with certain people every week, and that helps me. I will bounce ideas or any new things or any things I'm going through with people, and that helps me see if I'm right or if I'm wrong, right? If you talk to 10 people, and we talked about this last week, if you talk to them people, most of the time, if we're wrong, they'll be able to tell us. But if we're doing things by ourselves, then who's gonna help us tell us that? And that's all we talked about. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an importance to having that accountability there. And Jeremiah tells us that our heart is deceitfully wicked.
Right.
Our heart wants what it wants. It's selfish. In our sinful desire, we want what's best for us, easiest for us, will bring us the most joy. And sometimes we don't think about other people. Sometimes we don't think about what God wants. We just think what's best for me. So if we're trusting ourselves, and the Bible tells us that our heart is wicked, then we're playing a dangerous game of we're trusting our own sinful nature. But if we have other people to help us out, then there are better odds of us being called out when we're doing something wrong.
And none of us like to be weak or to think that we're weak. And I know at some level, saying that I have to include somebody else in my affairs is an admission of weakness. But as Christians, I mean, part of what we believe is that we don't really have what it takes in us naturally to live a righteous life. If we had what was in us to do it, we wouldn't have needed Jesus. We wouldn't have needed the cross. We wouldn't have needed his sacrifice. And so what you're trying to do is to get more and more engaged with his Holy Spirit, more and more engaged with the people in the body of Christ. So hopefully you can make the very best decisions possible. Now, one thing I noticed in church work, it was even stronger in youth ministry. The adults have learned to manage their faces a little more than kids have. But I see it with the adult ministry too. If you see somebody who is digging pretty deeply into the wrong decisions, it gets harder and harder and harder for them to even want to be here. It gets harder for them to want to participate here when they're here. There's something about going down the wrong road in this area that really cuts God out of your life in a hurry. And again, I don't totally understand why that is, other than this is not a sin like any other. It's not a sin that operates like any other. It gets your heart involved in a really weird way. It gets your spirit warped just a little bit different than anything else. And that was always a common thing. And I'm sure you see that in youth ministry, and I'm sure you see it in church. There's just something about going off of the wrong path here that isolates you even more from God's people. So you should war against that. If someone has kind of called your attention to something and said, hey, I think you're going on our path, or if you just wondered, this feels wrong, but I don't know if it is or isn't. I mean, is it drawing you closer to the people of God, or is it making you more secretive, more elusive, more quiet with them? And then that should be something that kind of wakes you up, hopefully, if you see it. One other thing we talked about, and again, it's the kind of thing that can seem kind of judgmental a little bit, and I recognize that going in, and I guess apologize for it somewhat, but I think it's helpful. It's good to set up some guardrails, just some things that, as a Christian, I won't go here because I know that I can't totally handle that, and those guardrails can be anything, and I can't tell you what to do. That is legalism. If I tell you you have to do this and this and this, or you can't be a Christian, well, that's legalism. And we're not saved by laws or adherence to laws. But it is smart for me to say, well, I know myself. I've been with Christ long enough. I know myself. And I know that if I go too far down this road, it warps me. So for my own protection, I'm just not going to get too close to that. Mm-hmm. For my own protection, well, that's not legalism. That's just being smart. And I don't think I'm saved by that. In fact, the guardrail is in the okay area. I'm putting the guardrail. A guardrail on the highway is still on the good. It's not off the cliff. The guardrail's not. It's still on the good ground. But I put the guardrail there so I don't even get close to the cliff. I mean, I put the guardrail there so I give myself a little bit of margin for error. And one of the things that we do as a staff, we don't have a lot of private meetings with somebody of the opposite gender. We try very, 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 very hard to avoid that. And if somehow, for some crazy reason, it was unavoidable, we alert our wives to it pretty fast. Hey, I'm going to be in this meeting with this person. If I can, I try to get them to come with me to that meeting. So again, it's not me all by myself. I can't remember the last time I had a meeting, just me by myself with somebody of the opposite gender. I really do try hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Not because I think that I'm going to do something stupid, but I don't even want to go down that road. Because that's the thing. You never know what might get you sideways. You never know what might tempt you or tempt the other person or just look bad. Any of those things.
And it's not even the temptation. It's just the way the world is today, that even the appearance of it.
Right.
Even the thought of Gabe, you were in a room with a lady for 20 minutes. What was that thought?
Right.
And I've known way too many people that have dealt with accusations, or so it's not even, for me, it's not even the thought of the immorality, but it's the fact that immorality is so prevalent that people will start accusing or thinking those things, and we're called to live above reproach. So by whatever means whatever we have to do to keep even the thought of that from happening, we have to. And I think that's a hard one, because I think we understand it working at a church, right? Just knowing about scandals,
right,
seeing it happen, that type of stuff, that makes us think, yeah, we're going to keep a lot of boundaries. But for people that think, well, this is silly, why am I not going to be able to give a ride to a lady? Right. Or that's silly, but not that every time you do that's going to lead to an adulterous situation, but how did those relationships start to begin
right,
with?
Right.
right? Who were those people alone with for a while? What were they doing before that? You don't just one day are happily married and the next day you're in an adulterous relationship. Something happened that escalated things.
And I'm sorry, and you want to pretend that that's what happened. I've talked to a lot of people through the years who go down that road, and they will say to me, "It just happened." You know, we didn't plan for it. It just sort of happened. Well, that's true, but there were all these lunches you had together, and there were all this private time, and you had secret jokes just between the two of you, and secret stories and secret memories that you couldn't tell your spouse about, and there were all these small compromises, and then one day, well, yeah, they kissed you, or one day it just went a little too far, and we didn't plan for that. But you crawled out as far as you could on that deal, so that all the stuff was set up for it to go a little bit of a bad direction. And then when it happened, well, you know, I didn't plan it; it just happened. Well, I don't know. I don't think that's how that works. And again, I think it comes from trusting ourselves too much. I think it comes from this idea that we like to believe we have total control of this thing all the time, and we don't. It's just it has a way of getting its hooks into us, really unlike any other sin. So even though, yeah, what Gabe said, we're in church and we're in ministry, and I think these are healthy standards for anybody. I think for some people, media is a problem, and a problem that you have to monitor. Now, for me, my wife has all my passwords to everything. She could anytime look at my phone, or I leave it laying around. I mean, she could anytime pick it up and wonder what. I wouldn't be worried if I got a text or a call to have her answer my phone and open it up and see what's going on. There's no secrets there. I really think that's the healthiest way. And I'm not saying that it's Julia doesn't spy on me all the time. If she was, that's evidence of another problem, right? But she could. I mean, she could. There's no secrets. And I really think with most people on media, I think that's the healthiest. And I think if that thing makes you itch, well, I wouldn't want her to know everything. It's worth asking yourself why. Why you wouldn't know to know everything. I just think it's healthy. And again, for me, it's just one more guardrail that keeps me from doing something I shouldn't.
Right. And it's all. The reason we go into all this, it really has to be like, do you want to stay away from immorality, or are you bordering it and you want to walk away from it? All these guidelines, it's not legalism. It's just the truth. Don't do these things, and you're going to find yourself in the slippery slope. C.S. Lewis talks about the slippery slope. The dangerous path is not the obvious drop off. It's the so slight grade that takes you down that one day you look back up and you're at the bottom of the mountain. Right. You never even knew you got there, right, because you weren't paying attention because of the little things that add up. And doing these things won't be easy. And doing these things, if you don't share your passwords or have the same bank account, it doesn't mean you're going to do it. But again, as a precaution, it's statistically, sadly, these things lead to that. And it's honestly in our role to spiritually guide people. I think that's something that has to be talked about. Are you equipping your own marriage or relationships to succeed and to not derail from where you're supposed to be?
And that's a good point. Again, I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm not. And I don't want you, if you look at that and say, well, that's stupid, I'm not doing that. You don't have to. I mean, there really is no rule about it. It's just, I think you want to do whatever you can to safeguard that part of your life, and I think you want to have a healthy doubt of yourself. When church camp a long time ago, we had a bunch of the boys together, and we were talking about pornography and how it can get its hooks into you, and it was a long conversation. And in the middle of the conversation, one of the boys talks about how it hit him one day. He said that he was all by himself in the house, and no one was there, and he had all the time in the world to get onto stuff, and he didn't plan to, he says, but next thing I know, one click leads to another, and I got into some pretty bad stuff. And I was watching it, and it was, was taking all that in, and he said, like 45 minutes later, I said enough, and I walked away, and he was so proud of himself, because, I knew God wouldn't want me doing it after 45 minutes. But again, that notion, we lie to ourselves. I said enough, and you kind of feel proud that you walked away from this thing, You didn't do anything. I mean,
Right.
you didn't do anything. But that nature, that's a kid. Adults will talk smoother and smarter than that. But just because we talk smoother and smarter doesn't mean it's any more righteous. It just has a way of getting its hooks into you. And you should be as ruthless as you can to deal with that. And again, get help, get light on the situation as much as you can. Most of the time with sexual sin, we have this fear that someone's going to discover it and they'll be disappointed. The very worst thing happens is when no one discovers it and you just keep doing it for years and years and years and years. Mm-hmm. Now, that was most of what I want to talk about. On the other side of this issue, and this could sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, you had a meditation on Sunday that wasn't about this at all, but it was about how you're getting ready to have a kid. Mm-hmm. And trust in yourself. Can you a little bit, if people didn't see it on Sunday, kind of give an idea?
Yeah. I talked about just doubts I had, and because of my upbringing, of the thoughts, if it was just entirely up to me, would I be able to handle being a father? And it's a very common doubt that, as I talk to people, everyone has at that point. No one is just one day ready to be a parent, having never done it before. But those doubts were real. And I also shared on Sunday just me going through trying to understand how to be a father when it wasn't modeled. And I also shared that my father recently tried to reach out and me trying to deal with that, because out of my own flesh, I probably won't want to have that conversation. I wouldn't want to talk and reconcile. I won't want to forgive. And that makes you wonder, myself as a parent, as a father, am I going to be the same to my son? Am I going to not be able to forgive? Am I not going to show that I love him? And then is my son going to feel those things towards me? So it was a cycle of fear. And I'm reminded that in the Bible, in 2 Timothy 1:7, it tells us that we're not given a spirit of fear. Jesus came to die to give us a spirit of love, of power, and of self-discipline, of a sound mind. So when we walk with God, with the Spirit of God, we're not supposed to be afraid of circumstances or of our past. We're supposed to continue to love others. We're supposed to have authority over those situations, and they're not going to control us. And we'll have a sound mind that's going to help us make decisions and not be afraid and not worry if we're going to do the right thing. And after that, I had a very cool thing happen where a lot of parents reached out to me. A lot of people in our church that are parents tell me that everyone feels the same way as a parent. You don't know what you're doing, and sometimes you think you make mistakes, but that's that's part of being a parent, is you learn how to parent. There's no way to cheat around it, and people have shared how they've messed up and done things that they're not proud of, but there is forgiveness, and that was really good for me to hear.
I guess, and again, all of that stuff doesn't totally deal with this. It was a communion meditation. It wasn't part of my sermon if you didn't watch it on Sunday, and it certainly wasn't dealing with sex and sexuality and all those kind of things. But the same principle applied. And while you might not get a chance to stand up and address the whole church and share your story with everybody like that, there's value in just putting some light on your fears, putting some light on the places you have doubt, putting some light on those things. Just mentioning, hey, I'm worried about this, just actually saying it out loud and getting some other people, and you found that to be true. And I think that's what you normally find to be true, that you're not all alone in the world, that you're not the only one dealing with this, that you're not the only one in that hole. And generally, now you may have had a negative conversation too. I didn't really ask about that. I don't know if you did or not. But generally, it's positive. I mean, generally the ones who want to come, because we've all been in the same deal. Now, I guess I should mention, especially on the sex and sexuality stuff, sometimes you can share stuff with somebody, you make a bad choice on who you share it with, and I understand the fear of that. And
Right.
And what if they give me a hard word and I don't want that hard word, or what if they aren't really listening, and those kind of things. And I understand that fear. I get that, and I have at different times shared part of my heart with somebody who I wished afterward that maybe I hadn't put myself out there quite as much. But it's the only way to get help. And it's the only way to get to where you need to go. And there's such power in 2 or 3 Christians getting together just to pray. And I wanted you to hear kind of this, because you mentioned that this morning, and I thought that was powerful, that people came along. And some of the stories they told you, well, in fact, I think most of the stories they told you weren't like, oh, man, it's easy, don't worry about it. It was more, hey, I was right where you're at. I did
Right.
this very same thing, and I didn't always do it right. I mean, you probably had a couple of those stories too. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the stuff I did, I'd give anything to go back and redo
Right.
it. But we survived it, and anyway, I just thought it was powerful. And while it didn't exactly relate totally 100%, it did relate to this idea of bringing in other voices and other opinions and other thoughts, because I think that's life saving.
Right. Someone to help you, someone to kind of counsel you, and
Right.
at least they help you feel that you're not alone
Right.
by messing up or having the thoughts or insecurities.
Because don't you think the loneliness of it is part of the enemy's strategy? I think they make you feel like you're the only one, that you're the biggest fraud, that you're the biggest, anybody else would be fine, but you're such a weakling, you're such a immature, whatever. You just don't have it in you. And I've even talked to guys who wonder if they can even be Christian because they struggle with sin or certain sins so much. I'm not even sure I can be a Christian. And I think the enemy works on us with that all the time. And
Right.
and it's never been because of your righteousness that you were saved. Always because of him. And us coming back to him like the sinners that we are, and knowing that he's going to take us and breathe new life into us. And the verse you shared, what was it again? 2 Timothy
1:7.
1:7. God's given us a spirit of power and love, and a sound mind, or self-discipline, and he wants to help us get there. We're not given a spirit of timidity or spirit of fear. Okay.
So
Go ahead.
to recap all this, on the thought of trusting yourself, the best way to help that, as we talked about last week too, is to have a group of people you can bounce things off of, that you're not alone in your thoughts or ideas and your temptations, that someone is in there to help you, or else you're fighting a battle alone, and you're not meant to fight the battle alone. You cannot fight the battle alone, because our flesh is going to want us to make the wrong decisions. The devil's going to want us to make the wrong decisions. So find people that are going to help you, find help, talk to people, talk to us, seek prayer, seek God. That really is the only way that you can walk in the Spirit and start making those good decisions for you and your family. So hopefully this whole video was able to help you with that, and that we were able to give you something practical and maybe even challenging to some of you, that maybe there's some things here that you're doing that you think maybe are taking you the wrong path. Consider changing some of the things that you do. So that's all I have. Is there anything else you want to add?
That's it.
Well, thank you for joining us. We hope that you got something out of this, and we hope to see you Sunday. We have services here, and if not, next Tuesday. Thank you.